philosophy, so most of their arguments are philosophically based, not really scientifically based. Because if you take that line they use, anecdotal evidence is invalid, for instance, and you apply it to a simple example. For example, 10 people I know in my town, if they tell me that they saw a man dressed in the mall, dressed as Santa Claus, taking photos with kids, for instance. If 10 people in my town told me that, chances are if I went to the mall and then looked for this Santa Claus, this guy dressed, in a Santa Claus suit, not the real Santa Claus, chances are, he would be there, So in that sense, the fact that 10 people or even 2 people telling me something like that would, most likely check out to be true. That pretty much says that. Anecdotal evidence points to something, and it's not worthless. It's like skeptics say, it's just something to consider based on the circumstances. And so if the skeptic's philosophy, doesn't even work with such a simple example as that, why should it, work for other things like ghosts, for instance? That's pretty much the fault, that I see in that.
Well, I definitely see that as well, because there's so many things that I guess there's people in my life whom I trust, right? And I put a trust level on, like, my parents. I trust them. I figure they're going to, for the most part, tell me the truth. Same thing with a lot of my friends. Same thing with, even listeners of Ghostly Talk. If they write me this incredible story about how they saw a ghost or whatever, I'll pretty much trust it until I have a reason to distrust it. So what happens is, I guess it all based on, the amount of trust that you have in their statements.
Yeah, that is a factor. If someone is credible and doesn't tend to make up things, you're going to trust that person more than some stranger you don't know. And that's the thing. With ghosts, there's everyone probably knows somebody who's seen a ghost, and everyone probably knows some credible people that they know that have seen a ghost. So that's why it's probably, next to God, one of the spiritual things that most people believe in.
I work with a lady, and I just actually got to work next to her, and she said her mother had passed away about a year ago. And I kind of brought it up about the whole spiritual thing and talking about Ghostly Talk, what I do, and everything like that. And I go, I know you're going to think I'm a nutcase, but I don't care, okay? This is what I've seen, and this is what I've heard, and this is what I've witnessed. And she says, if you would have been talking to me a year ago, I would have probably thought you were a nutcase, but I believe in ghosts now because my mother has came to me. So basically, if you don't believe, okay, and you shut your mind off to it, you're not going to see anything, or you're not going to see that side. So obviously you're going to keep arguing about it or have an argument about it. And for her to say that was pretty unique, because she said, I thought everybody was crazy, and I seen a ghost. Yeah, you're full of crap. But until it happened to her, now she's a believer, and she sees more of it. So she's, constantly seeing things. And
well, and that's the thing, though. Nobody can give skeptics that experience. They'd have to experience it for themselves. If a ghost suddenly visited James Randi and then he says, "Oh, now I believe because I saw a ghost."
I'm not crazy.
Yeah,
I thought everybody else was.
Right, and
just because it hasn't happened to them.
Right. But that's a huge part of your paper as well, Winston. There's something about that's a very closed-minded of them to believe that, or to sit there and say, this is not real because of all these different arguments, right? It's very closed-minded because they almost always, skeptics will almost always say, I'm open-minded about it. Even James Randi, he's the most celebrated skeptic, I guess. He's like, I'm so open-minded that I've issued this $1 million challenge, right, to prove it. But really, they're not open-minded about it.
No, not at all. see that. I mean, there's that saying, actions speak louder than words, and if you look at the pattern of what they say and how they act and the way they argue, I mean, it's pretty obvious that they're not open-minded and trying to find out something or because they aren't seekers of truth here, like we are, for instance. Their goal is to debunk and discredit, and just to find any way possible to discredit something, and they use tactics like spouting philosophical arguments, like anecdotal evidence is invalid, and raising the bar if someone finds something that supports it. They'll try to discredit that person in some way, or say, well, why didn't this work or that work? So it's kind of rationalizing, always finding, a reason to discredit or not believe, and it's pretty obvious when you're dealing with them that those are the tactics they use. And so you can tell if a person's a closed-minded or a cynical person from the pattern of his arguments and the way he thinks. Because everyone will pretty much say, oh, I'm open-minded. Anyone will say that, and everyone will say they're honest too, and everyone likes to think that they're an intellectual, but the way you can tell is from the pattern of tactics they use and arguments they use and how they think and reason.
And it's a little bit hypocritical as well, because when they say, okay, well, I'm open-minded about it, and I'm really, really into science, and here's my list of arguments why your story is all bunk, right? And they don't tend to listen to the counter arguments sometimes, saying, well, that's a philosophical argument. It does not erase the fact that I've given you this story. They're
too set on proving their point, and they're not open-minded.
Right, and not proving.
They believe that it's not real. So if you, by how they argue, and how they always constantly try to find some scientific whatever solution for it, why it's happening,
but
they're not.
That's the hypocritical part about it, though, because they're not trying to find a scientific reason for that not to exist. They're just arguing for the sake of argument's sake. I believe is that right, Winston? A lot of times they're like, why couldn't they? I've been reading this book called Parapsychology by Renee Sudre. And it describes back in the when it starts with Mesmer, that's going way back 1700s and stuff, and the different, there were labs all over the world. There were conferences, the Utrecht conference. There's all these conferences about where very scientific-minded people from universities and from private labs would get together and talk about their studies of the paranormal. And a lot of that was happening during the rage of spiritualism, the Fox sisters and stuff like that. And these very scientific-minded people would come together and discuss what they've done to study telepathy, to study psychokinesis. He doesn't specifically mention anything about ghosts. But other than, he thinks that there's some kind of poltergeist phenomena going on with real people causing ghostly activity. That's what it seems. I'm not really into that chapter yet. But but they, there's all these scientific-minded people who got together at conferences and discussed and took data, hard measurements, actual observations of scientifically minded people. They discussed it, they worked on it, they created reports, they checked each other's data, they would sometimes, join together and do experiments. They did all kinds of stuff. Is that going on anymore? There's no more actual, is there scientific, have you heard of anything, Winston? Scientific exploration of the paranormal?
Well, there's some conferences and meetings with groups such as the American Psychic Society and several other small groups